Welcome to Cafe Tales. Tonight we leave London fog for the neon and jazz of 1926 Paris, Montparnasse at full tilt, where masks glimmer, ledgers whisper, and violet ink meets red wax. A duke's seal, a financier with dazzling charm, a theater promising dawn, and Poirot immaculate as ever, separating spectacle from truth. Chapter 1, in which Paris pretends to be innocent. It is a curious truth observed by every Englishman who has ever taken a decent hat across the Channel, that Paris by day has the aspect of a cathedral, while by night she slips into sequins. At 11 o'clock in the morning, one may stroll beneath the sober facade of Saint-Sulpice and imagine a city of saints. At 11 in the evening, those same stones positively flirt with the shadows. During the spring of 1926, Paris's self-appointed reign of youth and jazz was in full bloom. Monsieur Hercule Poirot and I arrived at the Gare du Luxembourg just as the lights were beginning their nightly intrigue with the dark. Poirot, immaculate as a new coin, regarded the station clock with paternal satisfaction, as though it had been set to honor his punctuality. His mustaches presided over events like two small but dignified ambassadors. My own appearance, I regret to admit, owed more to the indignities of the Channel crossing, and a contretemps with a French porter who insisted on weighing my kit bag as if it contained contraband artillery. Courage. Hastings, said Poirot, patting his valise with the air of a man who travels not with shirts but with strategies. Paris has prepared herself to distract. We must therefore be very attentive to what? I asked, feeling unequal to any strenuous attention at that hour. To what she does not show, said Poirot. Always Paris covers the truth with something charming. Voila, the method. We had not come merely to admire charm. A letter had been delivered to Poirot in London upon ivory paper stiff enough to rebuff vulgarity. The signature, Le Duc de Brie, came with the pedigree of a cavalry charge. The Duke's letter spoke of a family embarrassment of an unusually modern kind, a phrase that affected Poirot much as a suspicious sauce affects a conscientious chef. He could not rest until he had discovered the trick, and by coincidence or fate, a separate wire had arrived from Miss Pamela Cartwright, an English sculptor we had encountered in Mayfair. She now wrote from Montparnasse, urging Poirot to meet the only man in Paris who can make Frank's pirouette, Alexandre Stavaran. Between an anxious duke and a financier of pirouetting Frank, Poirot judged Paris might indeed have a puzzle for him. We lodged at a quiet hotel on the Rue Jacob. Poirot insists on quiet as other men insist on cigars. We had scarcely unpacked when Miss Cartwright sent for us, the meeting place being La Rotonde, the very axis of Montparnasse. The terrace there was a floating republic of cigarettes, opinions and expatriates who had discovered that one might live on coffee, hope, and the exchange rate. Jazz from across the Atlantic had found a second homeland in Paris. Trumpets attempted liberties with the air that no British trumpet would hazard without a medical certificate. Pamela greeted us with the triumph of a young hostess who has found her guests an adventure. There you are. I was afraid you'd retreat into some solemn salon and miss all the fun. Sit here. You must have the full view. Montparnasse is fermenting this week. She introduced us to a painter whose canvases resembled a polite explosion, to an American novelist who claimed to be writing a book entirely about adjectives, and to a poet who had not yet discovered verbs. They all quarreled and smoked and gestured with the vigor of men whose rent was overdue but whose confidence was not. Even I, a plain soldier, felt Paris was trying to pull me into her dance. Listen, Pamela whispered. You must meet Stavaran. He sponsors ballets that end with a single drum beat and journals that consist of blank pages. People call him a genius, an artist of finance. He makes money appear and disappear more gracefully than Whodunit. The whole of Montparnasse is in love with him. Poirot's eyebrows rose an imperceptible half-inch. An artist in finance? Mon Dieu, that is an art most perilous. Before Pamela could elaborate, a tall, distinguished man entered the restaurant with the inevitability of history. Pamela waved eagerly, and I recognized him from the signature on Poirot's letter. "There you are," she repeated, this time to the newcomer. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, you must meet the Duke of Bray." The Duke approached with a bow, aged in courtesy. He was handsome in the manner of portraits, tall, upright, his evening clothes faultless, and carrying the faint perfume of leather and libraries that attend certain old families. He greeted Pamela as one greets youth, me as one greets an amiable stranger, and Poirot with measured relief. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "I thank you for answering my letter. The matter I hinted at upon paper is one that will not confide itself entirely to ink. May I trespass upon your time?" Poirot inclined his head. "It is always preferable, Monseigneur, to hear a difficulty from the lips rather than the pen. The pen flatters. The lips, they confess." The Duke seated himself, his dignity just managing to disguise anxiety. "My family, monsieur, is as old as the habit of spending. Our estates, once obedient as soldiers, now desert us in battalions. I sought advice, financial advice, and that advice bore the name Stavarin?" Poirot murmured. The Duke's expression was rueful. "You have heard of him, then?" Stavarin proposed municipal bonds to finance a new theater, the Théâtre de la Lueur. The public, he said, would profit by art. Art would be steadied by the public. A virtuous circle. And he asked that my seal lend respectability to the documents. In return, I received what were politely termed advances upon the theater's yet unrealized splendor. He drew from his pocket a sheath of handsome papers, bonds engraved with ornamental borders, their text in violet ink, stamped with a red wax impression of the Brie arms. Even to my inexpert eye, they looked as convincing as a banknote. "Charmant," Poirot murmured, turning one between his fingers. "The compliments of a duke to the pockets of the populace." The Duke lowered his voice. "There are whispers that these bonds have twins, that certain of them are duplicated, so that the same investment is sold twice. Our accountant, Monsieur Whodunit, has threatened to expose the matter unless irregularities are corrected at once. Should this become public, my name would be dragged through the mud as Stavarin's accomplice." Poirot bowed, his eyes twinkling. "We shall see what is true, Monseigneur. Meanwhile, you will sign nothing further and keep your seal under lock. For now, it is safer to speak than to write." The Duke allowed himself a weary smile. "Very good, monsieur. These days, a signature is perilously close to a confession." With that, he took his leave, promising discretion. Pamela watched him depart with the admiration of youth for history, still walking about in evening dress. "Poor man," she sighed. "He's rather like an old cathedral roof. Beautiful, but always about to fall in." "Few of us choose our prefaces," said Poirot. "It is the chapters that we write." Later that night, we wandered through Montparnasse, following the tug of drums to La Balle Negre, where Josephine Baker danced with that indecent decency of genius, the decency to be better than one deserves. Poirot, who admires symmetry wherever he finds it, applauded discreetly. I, meanwhile, discovered a cocktail called La Bonne Route, which began as a confidence and ended as a confession. On our way back to the hotel, we passed the shuttered facade of the Théâtre de la Lueur. A timid light glimmered beneath the stage door, as though the future were rehearsing in secret. Near the corner, 3 men argued in urgent whispers. One, wearing gloves white enough to be dishonest, slid a slim portfolio under his arm. Poirot touched the railing and lifted his fingers, stained with the faintest smear of violet. "It is only ink," I said, though my pulse jumped with curiosity. "Precisely," Poirot replied. "In Paris, ink is never only ink. It is a preface." And with that enigmatic pronouncement, we returned to our lodgings. Poirot, before retiring, arranged his brushes and hat stand with ceremonial care, as though preparing witnesses. He sat on the bed's edge, regarding me kindly. Hastings, you will observe 3 things. A woman who measures her sorrows, a man who counts applause, and a gentleman who has mislaid his sleep. That's 3 people, I protested. That is Paris, said Poirot, and in their intersection, one may shortly find a crime. So Chapter 2, The Benefactor with a Velvet Ledger. If one wishes to see Paris at her most recklessly charming, one must contrive to be invited to a soirée at Le Select. It is not enough merely to pay the entry fee. The trick is to belong there, which is a far trickier enterprise. Painters, poets, dancers, musicians. They did not so much enter the place as spill over its borders. The smoke alone could have illustrated 3 manifestos. Pamela, who knew everybody, produced us at 10, like 2 curiosities she had found in the English countryside. You mustn't just see Paris, she declared. You must survive her. I was not entirely reassured by the phrasing. Our party that evening included a somewhat unexpected figure, the Duke of Bray. Pamela, with her talent for blithe introductions, explained that she had persuaded him to join us. The Duke insists he must see Stavron in his natural habitat, she announced, as if she had invited a zoologist to the zoo. The Duke, though clearly ill at ease among the bobbed hair and cocktails, bore it with dignity. He inclined his head to Poirot. If Stavron has compromised my seal, monsieur, then I prefer to watch him in the act of charming others. The band was doing unspeakable things to a foxtrot. I would have called for a policeman had half the audience not been policemen in disguise, at least according to Poirot. Josephine Baker, whom we had admired the previous night, was there too, perched upon a bar stool with a smile so luminous it could have been seen from the Channel. Observe, Hastings, murmured Poirot. The Americans, they export both jazz and novelists. One makes too much noise, the other too many pages. Really, Poirot? I said, you can't lump them all together. Some of them may be perfectly sound fellows. Sound? Poirot lifted a delicate eyebrow. May we? I hear them. Sound is not the difficulty. Before I could defend an entire continent, the room shifted perceptibly, as if adjusting itself for the entrance of a superior personality. Alexandre Stavron had arrived. He did not walk into the club. He materialized. Like an afterthought Paris had suddenly remembered. He was of middle height, plump, with a complexion too well kept to be healthy, and he wore his boutonniere like a dividend. His smile could have reconciled a creditor and a debtor before dessert. A circle formed instantly, poets gesturing like semaphore signals, a young woman in pearls which looked 1 mortgage short of disappearing, and a painter with eyes so bloodshot they might have been preliminary studies in crimson. Art, Stavron proclaimed, hands uplifted as though blessing a cathedral of cocktails. Art must be financed boldly. The state is timid. The bourgeoisie are tedious. We must create theater, journal, ballet, poof, issue bonds upon their splendor. The public buys a share in genius. And the public, said Poirot silkily, is repaid in encore. Stavron laughed, a sound like a well-fed fountain. In dividends, monsieur. Beauty always pays, though one must occasionally remind it to do so. I was reminded not for the first time that Poirot can convey entire paragraphs of suspicion with one arch of his mustaches. Pamela leaned over to me, whispering, "Isn't he marvelous? He's rather like a magician, only with ledgers instead of rabbits." I privately thought rabbits were the more reliable investment, but kept my opinion to myself. At 12:15, a scream sliced the air like an incorrect note. The source was the cloakroom. We hurried, carried along by a tide of shocked curiosity. There, amidst a regiment of furs and perfumes, a man slumped unnaturally across a bench. His face was gray, his waistcoat stained, and a neat hole in his chest explained the rest. Poirot bent instantly to examine the corpse. "Monsieur Valençay," he said, as though greeting a tardy acquaintance. "The accountant," breathed Pamela. The Duke of Bray closed his eyes with aristocratic precision. "I," less usefully blurted, "Good heavens!" Poirot, already rummaging delicately with gloved fingers, produced a ticket from the man's pocket. "A theater ticket," he observed. "Bal Masqué, Loge 5. Tonight there is no performance. And yet our poor accountant keeps his appointment," he sniffed delicately. And here the odor. Not of gunpowder. None. Something more subtle. Ink. Violet. "I smell only perfume," I said. "That is because, mon ami, you have the nose of the gallant soldier. To you, the world is gunpowder or roses. But to Poirot et Bia, there are shades in between." The inspector of police arrived, Dutra of the Sûreté, wearing the expression of a man unimpressed by both crime and company. He ordered everyone to remain. Poirot bowed politely. "Of course, Inspector. I, too, am eager to learn who has chosen the cloakroom as a theater of murder." I confess the word sent a pleasurable shiver through me. A murder in Paris. It was the sort of thing one expects from cheap thrillers and dreadful stage melodramas, but seldom from accountants. Stavarin, when told, spread his hands in sorrow as though conducting a requiem, a tragedy. Poor Valençay, a man of ledgers, yet he failed to calculate the brevity of life. Still, the show must go on. "Not if the tickets are complimentary to the grave," muttered Poirot. The club murmured like a disturbed hive. Poets speculated aloud whether the murder might be symbolic. A painter insisted it was clearly an act of surrealism. One American novelist demanded to know who would buy him another drink. Pamela clutched my sleeve. "Captain Hastings, what does it mean?" I straightened. "It means, Miss Cartwright, that Hercule Poirot will shortly tell us. After tormenting me with a dozen clues I'll notice." Poirot, crouching beside the body, looked up with maddening serenity. "Hastings, you are improving already. Do you suspect yourself to be ignorant?" Set progress. Chapter 3. Coupons, Cubism, and a very inconvenient corpse. Inspector Dutra, having barked his orders and accepted our statements with the air of a man collecting parking fines, dispersed the crowd at Le Select with brutal efficiency. Poets slunk back to their metaphors. Painters returned to quarreling with color. An American novelist loudly demanded that someone memorialize the evening in his next chapter. Only 3 civilians remained in the inspector's orbit. Pamela Cartwright, because she would not be dismissed. The Duke of Bray, because his coat of arms was entangled with Stavarin's bonds. And ourselves, because Hercule Poirot proposed it in so courteous a tone that refusal would have been a social catastrophe. When there is an aristocrat snared by ink and wax, one does not let him out of sight, Hastings, Poirot murmured, as Dutra stalked off to harry the waiters. Besides, he has the look of a man who will remember his sleep only when I return it to him. The Duke, to do him justice, bore shock with that peculiar stamina of old houses in a gale. He stood very straight, his profile noble, his eyes hollowed by calculation of things not meant to be calculated. Honor, reputation, the price of a roof tile from 1739. "I will remain where you wish, Monsieur Poirot," he said quietly. "If there is disgrace to be harvested, I prefer to know the size of the field." We stepped into the fresher air of Montparnasse. Paris at that hour has the improvised cleanliness of a bar that has decided to be respectable for 5 minutes. The pavement smelled faintly of soap and sin. Pamela, still pale, fixed us with the determined brightness English women employ when refusing to faint. "You must both come at once," she declared to Shakespeare and Company. "They know everything there." "They know everything they have read," said Poirot, "which is already a great deal more than most. The Duke, who would have looked at home in a carriage, but slightly less so in a bookstore that sold credit as readily as literature, followed us with grim resignation. Shakespeare and Company, at that hour, resembled a refuge for unpaid genius. Lamps glowed like patient ideas. The little stove toiled. A cat expressed editorial doubts at our entrance. The proprietor, spectacles managing every book in the room at once, greeted Pamela and was introduced to Poirot with reverence. When told of the dead accountant, she pressed a hand to her mouth, then composed herself. "Valençay?" she repeated when asked. "Yes, he came here 2 nights ago, poor man," he read, moving his lips as if not to wake the type. "He asked for back numbers of La Revue Blanche. Heaven knows why. No one actually reads it. And muttered about coupons being clipped twice. He said there would be a ball, masque at the Théâtre de la Lueur, and that he would settle the matter in Loge 5. He seemed very nervous. She peered at a corner of the counter where a faint smear darkened the wood. Poirot leaned in, produced a folded handkerchief, and dabbed delicately. "Violet ink," he pronounced. "Very distinctive," the Duke stirred. "It is a fashionable color," he said, with the air of a man apologizing for a cousin's opera habit. "Fashionable, yes," Poirot agreed, "but it prefers certain friends. There is also a ghost of red wax here. See, in the grain. Not much. Just a courtesy call." The cat sneezed, which I took for agreement. "Coupons?" I asked, seeking to be useful. "Like ration books, bond coupons, Hastings," said Poirot kindly. "Detachable little promises. One clips them in exchanges for interest payments. To a financier, they are what mustaches are to a gentleman, indispensable, and sometimes counterfeited." "One ought never to tamper with mustaches," I said, glancing at his. Poirot's mustaches accepted the compliment like a small throne accepting a loyal address. Pamela wrung her hands, leaving little white crescents of marble dust on her skirt. "We should speak to Ardouin. He painted a portrait of Stavaran. The theater bought it. There's talk the frame hid. Oh dear, account books. It sounds hateful and modern." "Hateful and modern," the Duke repeated, as if tasting an unripe fruit. "The two often arrive together. We set out for Ardouin's studio, a somnolent courtyard away where the windows were fat with paint and purpose. Ardouin himself opened the door in a dressing gown that had retired from military service. He was a melancholy, ardent soul with a beard like abandoned ivy. The room was full of canvases that looked as though a polite explosion had been asked to remain within the lines. "My friends," he cried, "enter the sanctuary of color." "Oh, Mademoiselle Pamela," and oh, he recognized the Duke with the little start painters reserved for portraits that have stepped down from frames. "Monseigneur, not monarch," said the Duke wearily. "Bray will do, Monsieur Ardouin. We require facts. If you have none, we will accept metaphors, only reluctantly." "You wound me, monsieur," said Ardouin. "Facts I have, metaphors merely attend them like pages. Observe." He flung a drape aside to reveal the portrait of Stavaran, a square tempest of ochres and bruised blues, a bonfire that might be a small explosion, and eyes suggested by 2 quick rectangles that judged one from a great height. "Stavaran," he announced. "Painted entirely in financial anxiety," I peered dutifully. "Looks like a badly folded deck chair," I said, and instantly regretted it. "Captain Hastings," Pamela hissed, equal parts scandalized and amused. Ardouin paled. "You English, always literal, and yet— Yes, perhaps the deck chair of a man who never lies down." Poirot inclined his head. "The portrait is interesting, monsieur, but it is the stretcher bars I wish to admire. They have a reputation." Ardouin laughed with nervous triumph. The auditors came. We found the stretcher admirably hollow. One may insert thin ledgers into the frame, and they behave with the obedience of pious monks. "Ledgers of the Théâtre de la Lueur?" said Poirot softly. Ardoin blinked. But naturally. Stavarin purchased the work. One wishes to please a patron. It is the new symbiosis. Art shelters arithmetic. Arithmetic feeds art. And Monsieur Valençay? Poirot continued. New? Ardoin said cheerfully. We are modern. Pamela turned pink. I may have mentioned it to Stavarin at the ball, only because the champagne was heavenly. One wants to say something heavenward while drinking it. Champagne carries confessions upwards, said Poirot, like balloons. The Duke spoke suddenly, his voice rougher. And when the balloons burst, the confetti spells one's name. A sound downstairs interrupted. Us, the harsh bark of a pry bar, and the elbowing of furniture. Poirot moved to the landing with a swiftness surprising in a man whose greatest physical boast is the perfection of his tie. Down, he said, but carefully. We descended to the courtyard in time to see a shadow fling itself through the gate, carrying something long and awkward beneath his coat. Pamela gasped. Ardoin howled. The Duke, with admirable coolness, failed to give chase, an example I followed with shameful relief. Inside, the studio's portrait had been relieved of its stretcher bars. The canvas sagged like an aristocrat at a modern dance. Poirot examined the splintered ends, sniffed and prized out, with the delicacy of a surgeon, a sliver of paper trapped in the join. Aha, he said softly. A ledger scrap, stamped Théâtre de la Loire. We see the hand, he added, if not the face. Ardoin wrung his hands in a most painterly way. They wanted the wood. They wanted the arithmetic, corrected, Poirot said. The art is an alibi. The Duke, who had been studying a small smear on the edge of the canvas, spoke with sudden intensity. This ink, violet again. And here, look, red wax. How does wax find its way into a painter's stretcher? By invitation, Poirot said. A seal has been pressed upon documents which then rested here. One keeps ledgers in a frame, coupons in a pocket, and courage, where, monseigneur? In the family history, he said bleakly, where it is of no use to the present. We left Ardoin promising locks, bolts, and an anti-art burglar, if such a thing existed. Pamela walked between us to her atelier, stubbornly straight, the set of her jaw proclaiming that if she had betrayed art with champagne, she would at least atone with breakfast. I'll make you both omelets at dawn, she declared. Guilt is hungry work. Guilt, said Poirot, eats better than innocence. It tips. At her door, Pamela hesitated. Monsieur Poirot, do you think Stavarin killed Valençay? Poirot considered the moonlight on a broken step as if it had submitted a proposal. No. Stavarin is a magician of paper. His murders, if any, are of balances and reputations. A pistol spoils the line of his waistcoat. But he will know who required the vulgarity. And the Duke? She whispered, with a glance that was both sympathetic and frightened. The Duke, said Poirot, is learning a new language, accountancy. He speaks only honor. The translation is poor. We escorted her in, made certain that her bolts were committed to their vocation, and set off toward our own hotel. The streets had that strained silence of 3 o'clock in the morning, when even the stray cats are writing memoirs. The Théâtre de la Loire brooded behind its shutters. From within, one might have fancied hearing the soft tear of paper becoming ash, but that, I suppose, was imagination supplied by curiosity. Hastings, said Poirot abruptly. What is 2? 2? I repeated, startled. Well, 1 and 1. Just so. Our accountant speaks of coupons clipped twice. Our portrait yields stretcher bars emptied twice, first to hide ledgers, then to remove them. The violet ink appears in 2 places, Shakespeare's counter and Ardoin's edge. The red wax attends also. 2 colors, 2 witnesses. And lo, 5, a door built for 2. You mean there are 2 criminals? I hazarded, thrilling to my own audacity. Non, said Poirot. We are not at the end of a novel, mon ami. We are between chapters. But I begin to see the dance. The wolf is not alone. He waltzes. We had almost reached the hotel when the Duke halted, clapping a hand to his breast pocket with a muffled oath of the oldest and most well-bred kind. My seal, he said hoarsely. It is gone. I wore it tonight on a ribbon, family habit. It must have been taken in the crush at the club. Poirot stopped dead. His eyes, ordinarily amused, went very still indeed. So, he said, now the wax has no master. We stood in the quiet street, 3 silhouettes in a city that does not often pause. Somewhere, a newspaper boy rehearsed tomorrow's scandal. Poirot tapped the pavement with his cane, once lightly, as if to wake an idea. Come, he said. We will sleep. In the morning, I will ask Stavern a question to which he will give me a very beautiful answer. And then, Hastings, we shall see whether beauty pays. Does it? I asked, because someone had to. Always, said Poirot. But one must check the coupons. Chapter 4. A Waltz with the Wolf. If Stavron Suarez displayed his charm, his office displayed his philosophy. It was lodged in a tall, aloof building on the Boulevard Haussmann, wedged between a sober insurance company and a milliner who specialized in hats unsuitable for insurance companies. The vestibule was lined with mirrors, so that clients entering found themselves multiplied at once. A hint, I thought, of Stavron's business methods. We were received by a secretary whose hair was so severely parted it appeared to have been filed. She ushered us into Stavron's sanctum with the solemnity of a high priestess. The office was half temple, half trap. The carpet was thick enough to absorb creditors' footsteps. Guilt-inducing furniture reassured visitors that they were already part of history. On the wall hung a flattering portrait of Stavron himself, painted with such lenience that it might almost have been a bribe. The man rose to greet us, radiating prosperity as others radiate warmth. My dear friends, he cried, extending both hands as if presenting us with shares in his personality. How kind of you to visit me in this hour of sorrow. Poor Valençay, a tragic loss to arithmetic. But as for art, art lives on. Poirot inclined his head, eyes glinting. Eternal, yes. But Loge 5 is not eternal. Tell me, monsieur, why did Valençay carry a ticket for it? Stavron's smile did not falter. Valençay often met me there. A discreet arrangement. He may have kept the ticket as a souvenir. Accountants are sentimental, about figures. Poirot leaned nearer to the desk. A handsome cut-glass inkstand sat upon it, filled with violet ink that clung greedily to the nib. He touched it lightly. You prefer violet. It distinguishes, Stavron said. Black is for municipal clerks. I am no clerk. At that moment, the door opened and Pamela Cartwright sailed in, all cap and enthusiasm, with the Duke of Bright in her wake. The Duke looked as if he had been dragged there by duty rather than desire. His dignity was intact, though frayed at the edges. Stavron bowed extravagantly. Monseigneur, mademoiselle, how you honor me. And thank you again, Mademoiselle Pamela, for the delightful confidence you shared at the ball. The tale of ledgers hidden in Ardouan's stretcher. So ingenious, Pamela turned crimson. I never meant, of course not, Stavron said soothingly. But your honesty is refreshing. The Duke's voice cut across the air like a saber. You exploit my seal. You corrupt my friends. And Valençay dies the moment he threatens to expose you. Do not speak to me of refreshing. Stavron spread his hands, boutonniere trembling like a dividend under stress. Exploiting, corrupting, such ugly words. I finance the future. Sometimes the future arrives twice. That is hardly my fault. Paris adores paying twice for genius. Or once too often, Poirot murmured. Stavron smiled indulgently. Come, monsieur. If Valency was murdered, it was not by me. A pistol does not suit the line of my waistcoat. I kill with ledgers, not bullets. I attempted a contribution. But surely Valency's death places suspicion squarely on you, sir. What possible advantage could it bring? Stavarin patted my shoulder as one does a faithful but limited spaniel. Captain Hastings, suspicion is the tax one pays for admiration. I have long grown accustomed to both. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Admiration fades, monsieur. Suspicion never. The Duke's hands clenched upon his stick. My name is tied to your bonds, Stavarin. My seal has been stolen. Now wax and ink alike conspire against me. If this is ruin, it is ruin you contrived. Not contrived, monseigneur, Stavarin replied silkily. Merely choreographed. Life is a dance, is it not? Pamela, determined to restore civility, exclaimed, Well then, we are all dancing in the same waltz, aren't we? Precisely, said Poirot, turning. But some waltzers require more than two. The wolf does not dance alone. He has partners. The secretary reappeared to announce a waiting appointment. Stavarin pressed his hand theatrically to his heart. I implore you, gentlemen, expose whomever you wish. My conscience is as clear as my accounts, perhaps clearer. Then we shall see, Poirot said softly, and ushered us out. The boulevard outside seemed too bright after Stavarin's office. Pamela walked beside me, chattering in indignation. The impudence of him, making me look as though I'd betrayed state secrets when it was only champagne and conversation. Champagne and conversation, Poirot said gravely, are the mother and father of indiscretion. The child is always trouble. The Duke stalked beside us, colorless. My name is finished, he muttered. Whatever you discover, Monsieur Poirot, society will decide already. A ducal seal in Stavarin's hands, a murdered accountant, it is enough. Poirot halted and looked at him sharply. No, monseigneur. Nobility is often blamed for what it represents, not for what it does. It is my task to separate the one from the other. The Duke inclined his head, though without conviction. We strolled on, Pamela darting ahead to peer in shop windows. Poirot silent in thought. Presently I ventured, Do you believe Stavarin guilty? Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings. Stavarin arranges illusions. He dupes, he duplicates, he decorates. But to fire a pistol into Valency's chest? No, that is not his style. He kills Valences, not men. Then who? Poirot lifted a finger. Someone desperate. Someone whose ruin Valency threatened to expose. Someone who profits by silence. Pamela rejoined us, triumphant with a baguette she had purchased, merely to have an excuse to wave it like a saber. If Stavarin didn't do it, she declared, then who did? Poirot smiled faintly. That, mademoiselle, we shall learn at the ball, masked. Under the masks, the faces will betray themselves, especially the one tied with red wax. That night, back at the hotel, Poirot arranged his brushes and hat stand with unusual severity. He sat upon the bed's edge, mustaches gleaming, eyes alight with calculation. Hastings, he said, this dance grows faster. Violet ink, red wax, duplicate coupons. These are the steps. Valency tried to interrupt and was silenced. Now the partners spin round one another, but they cannot dance forever. Soon one must stumble, and then, Poirot said softly, the wolf is revealed, and the waltz terminates at La Lumière. Chapter 6. The Sculptor's Secret. At noon the following day, the Théâtre de la Lueur felt less like a palace of art, and more like a courtroom. Gone were the chandelier's gaiety. Dust motes floated in the stillness. Poirot had commanded our return, and all obeyed. Stavarin sleek but nervous. The Duke of Bray, hollow-eyed in the aftermath of scandal. Inspector Dutra, mustache bristling with anticipation. And Pamela Cartwright, bright as ever though her green eyes flickered with curiosity. Poirot stood at center stage as though it belonged to him. He bowed slightly, mustaches glittering. Mesdames et messieurs, last night I promised that the masks would fall. Today we unmask not only fraud but murder. For Valençay's death was no accident of finance, no quarrel gone too far. It was deliberate, Dutra harumphed. Then speak, monsieur. Was it Stavaran? Everyone says so. Stavaran spread his hands with theatrical humility. I am prepared for the accusation. My ledgers, my ink. Yes, I deceived. I duplicated. But murder? That I did not commit, Pamela giggled. Honestly, who better to blame than Stavaran? It's practically a compliment. Poirot lifted a finger. Ah, mademoiselle, too quick to laugh. But first the fraud. Stavaran is guilty of duplication. The violet ink on coupons, the ledgers hidden in Arduin's frame, the bonds stamped twice. For this, he will answer. Stavaran inclined his head. I bow to arithmetic. Poirot's voice sharpened. But murder? No, for murder we look elsewhere. Consider. Valençay carried a ticket for Loge 5. There, he meant to confront Stavaran. Instead, he died in the cloakroom. A strange detour. N'est-ce pas? I frowned. So Stavaran didn't meet him? No. Valençay was intercepted before the meeting. Intercepted by one who knew his appointment and feared what he would reveal. Someone who spoke with him closely enough to stain his cuff with red wax. Someone who fired the fatal shot. Poirot turned slowly. And that person was Pamela Cartwright. The word struck like a thunderclap. I nearly dropped my hat. Pamela? Impossible. She laughed too loudly. Monsieur Poirot, you are joking. Me kill Valençay? I couldn't frighten a sparrow, Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet you did more than frighten. You silenced. Shall I explain? He paced, small hands clasped. First, Valençay threatened not only Stavaran but the Duke. Valençay had discovered that some of the duplicated bonds bore the Duke's own initials, not forged, genuine. The Duke, pressed for funds, had lent his hand. Exposure would have ruined him utterly, the Duke groaned. Monsieur, I was reckless, yes, but Valençay is dead and I did not kill him. Poirot bowed. Just so, you did not. Someone killed for you. Someone who adored you. Pamela's mask of laughter slipped a fraction. Adored? Yes, you, mademoiselle. You were infatuated with the Duke. It was plain in your glances in your defense of him. When Valençay threatened him, you resolved to protect his honor by any means. You lured Valençay to the cloakroom, pressed close enough to smear wax upon his cuff, and shot him. A sculptor's hand is steady, is it not? And you knew no one would suspect the lively girl who laughed at champagne. Pamela's color drained, but she flung her head high. And what of your so-called proofs? Poirot produced the crumpled program he had found. This dropped outside Loge 5 last night. Upon it, violet ink. Stavaran's, yes, but also a streak of wax, imperfectly impressed. Who carried the Duke's stolen seal at the ball? Not Stavaran, he flaunts. He does not hide. Not the Duke, he would not dare. You, mademoiselle. You alone. You had the seal from the moment you cut it from the Duke's ribbon at the club, to stamp false documents to protect him further. You dropped the program in your haste, I gasped. But the shadow we saw, tall, cloaked. Poirot smiled sadly. Illusion, mon ami. In the half-light, a sweeping cloak and quick stride deceive. Besides, Pamela is no tiny waif. Height enough to confuse. Determination enough to convince. Pamela's eyes flashed. Desperation breaking through charm. It was for love. He is everything. Lineage, beauty, despair. Valençay would have destroyed him. I had to act. The Duke staggered, face ashen. Mademoiselle, you thought to save me at such cost? Dutra stepped forward grimly. At the cost of a man's life, that is enough. Pamela Cartwright, you are under arrest for the murder of Monsieur Valençay. She laughed once, brittle and bright. Well, I always said art demanded sacrifice. I never thought I should be the sculptor myself. Later, over coffee at our hotel, I struggled with the memory of Pamela's green eyes hardening into steel. I would never have believed it, Poirot. She was so charming, Poirot suggested. Lively, innocent. Yes, precisely. That is why it succeeded. The obvious suspects, Staveren and the Duke, they carried suspicion like perfume. Pamela wore only laughter, and so she was invisible. And her motive? Love for the Duke. Poirot nodded gravely. Love, desperation, and pride. A dangerous cocktail, mon ami. More fatal than champagne. He sipped delicately at his chocolate. Remember this, Hastings. In a masquerade, it is not the mask that deceives. It is the smile beneath, music. Merci for spending your evening in Montparnasse. From violet ink and red wax to ledgers tucked behind canvases, Paris tried its best to keep secrets until Poirot straightened the paper. Tell me below, which clue clicked for you first? The coupons, the seal, or the masquerade? And who had your vote for prime suspect before the reveal? If you enjoyed the ride, tapping subscribe is the smallest action with the biggest impact. Most regular listeners still aren't subscribed. For ad-free episodes and bonus bits, consider joining the channel, or tip us via the links in the description. Your support keeps the stories and the jazz going. Until next time, keep your coupons unclipped, your masks tied tight, and your little gray cells well rested. Bon appétit and bonne nuit. Poirot turned slowly, and that person was Pamela Cartwright. The word struck like a thunderclap. I nearly dropped my hat. Pamela? Impossible. She laughed too loudly. Monsieur Poirot, you are joking. Me kill Valençay? I couldn't frighten a sparrow, Poirot's eyes gleamed. And yet you did more than frighten. You silenced. Shall I explain? He paced, small hands clasped. First, Valençay threatened not only Staveren but the Duke. Valençay had discovered that some of the duplicated bonds bore the Duke's own initials, not forged, genuine. The Duke, pressed for funds, had lent his hand. Exposure would have ruined him utterly, the Duke groaned. Monsieur, I was reckless, yes, but Valençay is dead and I did not kill him. Poirot bowed. Just so, you did not. Someone killed for you. Someone who adored you. Pamela's mask of laughter slipped a fraction. Adored? Yes, you, mademoiselle. You were infatuated with the Duke. It was plain in your glances in your defense of him. When Valençay threatened him, you resolved to protect his honor by any means. You lured Valençay to the cloakroom, pressed close enough to smear wax upon his cuff, and shot him. A sculptor's hand is steady, is it not? And you knew no one would suspect the lively girl who laughed at champagne. Pamela's color drained, but she flung her head high. And what of your so-called proofs? Poirot produced the crumpled program he had found. This dropped outside Loge 5 last night. Upon it, violet ink. Staveran's, yes, but also a streak of wax, imperfectly impressed. Who carried the Duke's stolen seal at the ball? Not Staveren, he flaunts. He does not hide. Not the Duke, he would not dare. You, mademoiselle. You alone. You had the seal from the moment you cut it from the Duke's ribbon at the club, to stamp false documents to protect him further. You dropped the program in your haste, I gasped. But the shadow we saw, tall, cloaked. Poirot smiled sadly. Illusion, mon ami. In the half-light, a sweeping cloak and quick stride deceive. Besides, Pamela is no tiny waif. Height enough to confuse. Determination enough to convince. Pamela's eyes flashed, desperation breaking through charm. It was for love. He is everything, lineage, beauty, despair. Valençay would have destroyed him. I had to act. The Duke staggered, face ashen. Mademoiselle, you thought to save me at such cost? Dutra stepped forward grimly. At the cost of a man's life, that is enough. Pamela Cartwright, you are under arrest for the murder of Monsieur Valençay. She laughed once, brittle and bright. Well, I always said art demanded sacrifice. I never thought I should be the sculptor myself. Later, over coffee at our hotel, I struggled with the memory of Pamela's green eyes hardening into steel. I would never have believed it, Poirot. She was so charming, Poirot suggested. Lively, innocent. Yes, precisely. That is why it succeeded. The obvious suspects, Staveren and the Duke, they carried suspicion like perfume. Pamela wore only laughter, and so she was invisible. And her motive? Love for the Duke. Poirot nodded gravely. Love, desperation, and pride. A dangerous cocktail, mon ami. More fatal than champagne. He sipped delicately at his chocolate. Remember this, Hastings. In a masquerade, it is not the mask that deceives. It is the smile beneath, music. Merci for spending your evening in Montparnasse. From violet ink and red wax to ledgers tucked behind canvases, Paris tried its best to keep secrets until Poirot straightened the paper. Tell me below, which clue clicked for you first? The coupons, the seal, or the masquerade? And who had your vote for prime suspect before the reveal? If you enjoyed the ride, tapping subscribe is the smallest action with the biggest impact. Most regular listeners still aren't subscribed. For ad-free episodes and bonus bits, consider joining the channel or tip us via the links in the description. Your support keeps the stories and the jazz going. Until next time, keep your coupons unclipped, your masks tied tight, and your little gray cells well rested. Bon appétit and bonne nuit.